It's tragic, really.
Shirley, are you here?
We all have a story.
We are contacting 911 for you.
A dark secret wrapped in emptiness and regret.
Quite frankly, I'm glad I did it.
You know.
They took her life.
They just can't prove it.
The toll. I'm Nancy Simpson. I found a woman who says she was Shirley Jane's best friend, lived near the grandparents. Shirley's youngest sister wouldn't talk to me, but sent me to this woman, who lives in Texas. Said she'd talk. Oh, she'd talk all right. Scream, cry, talk. Twice this went on and on. She was all liquored up. Her words, not mine. She was super mad at the idea of people injecting themselves into this story. She'll love the parts where I tell my own stories in here for sure. She says people are just wanting to claim some sort of glory, get their 15 minutes of fame by latching on to this sensational murder. Be a rock star, she kept yelling. I confirmed with others that she lived in the neighborhood in 1975. Others had stories that included this woman when she was a child. I'm telling you, if I would have told her I found other people who were friends with Shirley, I think she would have flipped her chickens, as my daughter says. The two of us against the world, she'd say. She had some stuff wrong as she yelled about this or that. But she also had the tragic story of talking to the cops. No one telling her her friend was missing, learning of her friend's murder. 10 years old, and going to the funeral. Those are the parts where she's crying. I want to tell you right now that I don't feel most people are telling me their story that connects them to Shirley Jane Rose because they're chomping at the bit for their 15 minutes of fame. I'm tracking these people down, Facebook, sending follow-up letters to some address I hope they still live at, begging for help from mutual acquaintances, asking these people sometimes over and over to tell me their story. Some say yes, then call back and say no. Some refuse to call back, and then others call back and share with me how this little girl's death haunts them. You've heard those stories. For others, it's a trigger. Talk a bit, then done. Just can't. This process is nothing new for reporters, and it's what police investigators go through every day. Investigators have been the most reluctant to talk to me, by nature, I guess. I basically have Jack from episode 1 who organized the search party to look for the little girl. Others who have worked on the case throughout the years won't go on record with me. One won't return any of my messages after agreeing to help. Detective Steiger from Seattle, who's offering some expert opinions throughout this series, says when it comes to investigators, this is pretty standard. I asked him if retired investigators were afraid of throwing others under the bus, not wanting to focus on things that went wrong.
And that's possible. That could be the reason, or it could be that, thinking, well, it's an open investigation. I better not talk about this in the media. The thing is, it's not throwing an investigator under the bus who in 1974, 75, had a hammer when you have a complete construction crew, right? He didn't have the resources and not the experience probably. So it's not throwing him under the bus to say, yeah, if this had been done today, we'd have done it differently. That's because everything is done differently than was done back then. You're not critical of the detective. It's just that there are things that could be missed that are very valuable today. Back in 74, the biological sample, all you could get was ABO, what blood type it was, RH negative or positive. That was it. And then it was only huge classes. They didn't know anything about DNA use. And even in the 90s, in like 1990 or 89, when I became a detective, you had to have huge samples to get a DNA profile. And then it was only limited value that you could match against a person. But it's just evolved so much. And over the last 5 years, it's like gone on hyperdrive, all the new stuff and things you can get DNA off of. And the transfer of DNA is so simple now. And the technology is so sensitive. When I was working homicides a few years ago, I'd get a DNA hit on a murder scene and match it up to a person and they'd tell me that the probability of it being selected from a person at random is 1 in 54 quintillion, and that's 54 with 18 zeros. Well, now, because they have 23 loci instead of 13, you're getting 23 to the 50th power. That's how much more sensitive it is. The probabilities are. And again, things with the MVAC or other DNA collection processes, touch DNA. If I walk up to you and touch you on the shoulder and walk away, my DNA is on your shoulder and today can be recovered, when only a few years ago. So, that's huge.
So it's probably they're not talking to me more because it's still an active investigation.
Yeah, I'm guessing that'd be it. They don't want to be the person, and I also get jammed up by the department for talking about an active investigation with the media. You got to be real careful about that. There's certain things. I had a huge case in 2009 where a police officer was ambushed and murdered. It was my case, and it was a ton of pressure. And I got calls every day from people I know in the local media here. And I remember one female reporter telling me on the phone, just give me anything, I can help you solve this. And I said, everything I give you, I'm whispering into the ear of the killer. And then he'll know if I'm close or not, and it could affect his behavior. I can't do it. So what we did is, we just let out the things we wanted to be let out, that we knew that we wanted the killer to know. And it's working, because what they put out was a photograph of his car. We got a surveillance video, and we put it out in the media, and about a day later, and it was an old piece of junk car, we get a call from our apartment manager. Says, yeah, this guy lives in my apartment. He has this old piece of junk car like that one of the news, and all of a sudden he put a car cover over it. He never used to before. Well, guess what? That was the guy. It ended up going down there, ended up being a big shootout with him, and he got hit. That was the thing, is it was controlling the information going out. Because everything that is told to the media, the killer is hearing. Like I said, if he knows you're way off, he'll relax, not worry about it. But if he doesn't know and thinks you might be getting close, he might be doing something stupid and some behavioral thing that changes or rings a bell with somebody, or even says something to somebody that he trusts.
It's the same reason Springfield police wouldn't show me that report concerning the interrogation room with the Fletcher brothers back in 1975. So I decided not to use the friend from so long ago, not knowing what kind of trouble that would cause down the road that simply wouldn't be worth the fight in the end. Pick your battles. My heart hurts for this woman, though. This murder runs deep for her, thinks about Shirley Jane, everyday type hurt. And I believed her when she said that. I just want to make it perfectly clear that I don't feel anyone is getting any glory here. There's a young woman who was brought to my attention, and I saw some small paper clippings about her disappearance as I researched Shirley Jane Rose's murder. Her name is Tina Sue Spencer. She was an 18-year-old runaway from an area north of Springfield. That's how she's described, a runaway, but she was legally an adult. Tina Sue was last seen by her parents January 5th, 1976, and last made contact from Florida in March. So that would be just a few months after Shirley Jane Rose was abducted and murdered. This is where people stop and start asking different questions. Tina Sue's body was found 11 months after she was reported missing. Her remains found a mile from Shirley's in that wooded area near McDaniel Lake, and she too had been strangled. A knotted vinyl belt was found near her neck. Same time frame, same proximity, and murdered in a similar manner. I contacted the police department to make sure I wasn't missing a link here, but didn't hear back. If there'd been one, it would have made the news. Tina Sue's birthday was on November 23rd. If it had been November 21st, like Shirley and me, I was going to freak out. Still, it's kind of close, right? I have a woman I need to introduce, someone who was also affected by the murder of Shirley Jane Rose. Dawn Woodring, her mom, Mrs. White, was Shirley's teacher. I didn't exactly know where to put Dawn in this series, but I was able to find her, and she was gracious enough to tell me her story. And it, too, is the epitome of the toll. Juanita White was Shirley Jane's teacher for all of 3rd grade, and then again in 4th grade. Well, at least the 2 months of Shirley's 4th grade. That year she disappeared. So this wasn't a woman who had her for just 2 months. She knew Shirley Jane, and according to Mrs. White's daughter, Dawn Woodring, the teacher had a special place in her heart for that little girl. Mrs. White is gone, died in 1989. Dawn says her family lived in the trailer park down the road from Shirley's house. Dawn was in junior high. She remembers at least on one occasion Shirley Jane joining them for dinner at their mobile home. Dawn says she remembers her mom saying Shirley would show up to school dirty.
And so my mom would take her in the bathroom, and she had soap and toothbrush for her, wash her arms with her hands. They were always dirty, in her face.
Dawn says her mom gave all of her students one-on-one time and was sure to pay special attention to Shirley.
She was a sweet little girl and cute, and my mom just took us with her. She had lunch with her in her room. That was one of my mom's practices. She usually would have one student that she ate with in her room, just to get to know them better, and they really loved her, so the kids were really happy. She would have a one-on-one with the students. And, of course, when they had their individual lunches with her, she would talk about her home life and stuff like that. And it took a while for her to open up.
But Dawn doesn't know what was said exactly. She just knew it was tough. Dawn says her brother worked for a funeral home and ambulance company and was actually one of the first to know Shirley's remains had been found. And he called their mom.
He knew who it was and contacted my mom right away because, she just spread it about it all the time, what had happened to her, she was okay. And she cried and cried and cried after she passed.
Dawn says her mom, Mrs. White, was, of course, very sad. The toll.
It affected her greatly. It was hard to get my mom to cry, but she cried and cried and cried. She was so upset, because she really, really, she loved her, She had a picture of her, a school picture of her, and we hung it on the refrigerator for the longest time. It was a good year and a half that we kept that up there, so that was important to my mom. Even when we talk about it, she'd get teary-eyed, even as she was older,
I'd like to reintroduce myself. My name is Nancy Simpson, and I grew up in abuse and neglect. I went to the bathroom, warmed up my coffee, got a piece of chocolate, taped a funny note on the boss's door, talked with a coworker in this nearly empty building. Anything to avoid this portion of the story. Because telling your truth is hard. The moral of this part of the podcast is teachers are freaking awesome. To get there, we're going to talk to the marketing manager for The Toll. My sister, Pamela. Pam is 9 years younger than me, and because of that age difference, we've lived nearly separate lives with the same ugly, themed, recycled stories. We grew up on a pig farm with 5 people packed in a 2-bedroom trailer. My parents had me, and then 8 years later had 2 babies back to back. They were not emotionally nor financially equipped for this. The living room of that tiny trailer was my sister's bedroom. There was nowhere to hide. Our dad was severely broken, and our mom eventually hid in a deep depression. My sister and I laugh a lot, even through some of this, because that's how we cope. Please keep that in mind. Teachers were always a pivotal part of our childhood, and not just for learning.
As far as teachers taking care of us or people helping out or people that were observant, I had a second grade teacher who always did that. She always wiped my face, and she'd take a paper clip and she'd pull my hair to the side and she would clean me up. Her name was Mrs. Scroggs, and everybody thought she was the meanest teacher. And I just loved her because she would take a moment to give me a little bit of love and attention and make sure my hair was out of my face and that I was ready to study. And she did that for me every day.
I had a 5th grade teacher who I adore, and she was just you were always such a happy kid. I didn't really know that anything was wrong at home. And I was well, I knew I didn't live there. This wasn't who I was for the rest of my life. I just needed to be able to live long enough to grow up and get out of here.
Yeah.
Pam says a lot of people around us were struggling, and that made it hard for others to really get involved.
It was glaringly apparent to the people in our lives that stuff was batshit in our world, and nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Jay, I'll just tell this story. When I was in kindergarten, we had this school bus driver who was both a positive influence in my life, kind of, and not a positive influence. We lived on this farm road, and it was a highway, but it was really just a 2-way road. We're waiting for the bus to come, and Nancy gets on the bus, our other sister gets on the bus, and I'm the third one, again, 6 years old. And she's not paying attention, and she just closed the door in front of us, or in front of me, and drives off. And so I'm trying to figure out what to do. So I'm I guess I have to go back in and get mom and dad. So I go in and get mom and dad, and my dad wakes up, throws me in the truck, and drives to school. first of all, like he just always presented like a maniac. So his shoes were typically taped together, his clothes had bleach stains on it, and he was missing teeth, and his hair stood straight up. So he just looked like a cartoon character. And he would just started screaming and being belligerent at the bus driver. And I remember even back then being like, oh, dear Lord, just stop. So I have a bunch of stories where I am perfectly aware of how people perceive that we're not just not okay, but just not to be messed with either.
I've never told Pam that I was the one who got the biggest blame with that bus fiasco. I was 15. I was screamed at every morning for days. I didn't react as she told that story. This brings back a lot of sadness and guilt for me. Pam will say I took the brunt of our father's physical abuse, and there was a lot, but she took on plenty herself.
When I was in the 7th grade, Dad sat on my chest and punched me in the face. And I went to school I was 13 years old, and I was probably, 4'7", 4'9", 100 pounds wet. And the side of my face was just busted up. And the social worker called me in and talked to me about it. And she brought me in because my other friend had gone and told on me that this had happened in my life. And I was super upset with my friend because I knew, in our weird, messed up world, I knew that my friend was being sexually molested by her grandfather, and I kept that secret for her. So how dare she go to the counselor and talk about my abuse? It was just like these weird, insulated, shame-filled lives that we lived as children, But clearly, my father had hit me, and clearly my friend had told the guidance counselor because she was scared for me, or the social worker. And the social worker said what had happened, or asked what had happened, and I told her that my sister and I got in a fight. And she said, I know that's not true. And I said to her, please don't tell anybody. Please. It's just going to be worse. And she said, I won't tell anybody this time, but if it ever happens again, I have to tell you, I have to call somebody.
Okay. That's an awesome social worker.
It was like that. No one wanted it. The community was full of stories like that. Communities are full of stories like that, especially like poor communities are full of them. And it's a matter of where do you start making it on the spectrum for somebody to do something.
Pam tells a story about our bus driver giving her a bag of clothes. My mom had a hard time recognizing Pamela as a real person in our family. I know, it sounds weird, but she just did. And by this time, Pam said she realized she was really on her own.
And in it was a sweatshirt for the high school football team. And I was super excited to get that and wear that. But the rest of it was all like clothes either that were extremely big because they belonged to her. So they were either plus size or they were woefully outdated because they belonged to her daughter who was, 2 decades older than me or whatever. I went home and that literally was the clothing supply. Like that was a satisfactory solution to having clothes to wear for a small child in our family's life. Because there's so much going on and so many feelings and so many worries. And if you aren't starving, if you aren't presenting some sort of problem at school where the authorities were involved, if you were in the house and you were making it, that was good enough, right?
Back to Shirley Jane's teacher's daughter, Dawn, and how her mom, Mrs. White, tried to make a difference in that little girl's life.
Gosh, I just can only imagine how that. I believe that to be true, right? That
I don't doubt this one bit. She was very heartfelt. Her mom died in 1989 of cancer. She said it haunted her, the whole time. She would cry every once in a while just because the thought of it would make her sad. So it just kind of seemed like she really did have a soft spot for this little girl.
It sounds like she took a moment to really make a connection to this little girl. And it sounds like Shirley was an absolute sweetheart and was responsive to that. I mean, can you imagine what that type of bond, would feel like? That's when you talk about the teacher that made such an impact on you. It's that moment. My second grade teacher, I will say, she definitely took a moment and did those things for me. And I would have been a little bit younger at that time. But I remember Mrs. Ragland, and she also was that safe space. She really held the energy of the classroom. And when I would leave the chaos of my house and go to school, I just felt such warmth and adoration for this woman, for the consistency that she provided, for the guidance and the investment that she was making. I remember writing a love song for her and singing it in front of the entire class.
And, Mrs. Bruins, who was the one who made such an impact on me, she said, I just didn't really know you had a hard home life. And I was like, you know what? I came here. I called her mom, not once, but twice. I'd never done that with any other teacher. And I did it twice to her. And I remember it very, very specifically because even at 5th grade, 10, 11 years old, I thought, oh, that's what I want in a mom, right? I felt that safety that you're talking about, going to school and having somebody care for you and really invest the time and really tell you what a great job you're doing. And she really made a huge impact on me being a writer and going into this career. And I, have met with her since and thanked her. But that was that moment where you're like, okay, this makes a huge difference. And I think that teacher had probably had students in the past who she'd made that connection with. And if Shirley would have made it, maybe it could have made such a difference in her life. And just hitting you that your student is no longer with you, but also hitting you that there's nothing you can do about it. You tried to be kind.
Sure. And also like she is giving a perspective, or, it's being shared with you as an insider perspective of what Shirley was sharing with her teacher. But so often being poor doesn't equate to being unloved, right? And being poor doesn't equate to being abused. So from an outsider's perspective on yours or my life, as little kids, we were just really well behaved. Knowing how to behave in public was a big part of our upbringing, but mostly about keeping appearances. If you're bringing attention to yourself, then you're bringing attention to us.
Bottom line, shout out to teachers and bus drivers and principals and coaches, all of the adults in schools who go home and cry after making do with supplies for a little girl who shows up with nothing or washes a little boy's face so he won't get teased. Thank you, Mrs. White, for taking care of Shirley Jane Rose. Next time on The Toll.
Nancy Simpson.
PTTS breaking news this hour. Police are working a possible abduction. This is in the 4200 block of West Lombard.
Those who knew her and loved her, and even those who didn't know her, will be able to enjoy a place our girl loved so much.
More than one person was involved in trying to stop this, and unfortunately it didn't happen.
It just makes us step back and think how quick a life can be taken from us.
Help others feel The Toll. Like, share, subscribe. The Toll Podcast, The Path Back Home, is a production of The Toll, LLC. Co-creator and host, Nancy Simpson. Co-creator and executive producer, Jay Lashley. Technical producer and audio editor, Kat Morgan Gaines. Marketing manager, Pamela Shelby. Web design and digital creative director, Shelby Powers. Technical analyst for digital strategy, Christina Oswald. Special thanks to Eliza Blackwood, transcriptionist, and Austin Robertson, voiceover. Original theme by Jay Lashley. Additional music by FirstCom. Reproduction or use of any part of this podcast without the express permission of the Toll LLC is prohibited. Get updates at our website, thetollpodcast.com.